do well at Super Rugby, Currie Cup, maybe if he goes and plays overseas in a club setup, but he's always going to be on the peripheral of that Test match 23. There is issues with his defence, with his size, where Willems has just always had the mongrel as a schoolboy. He's always been a very physical player. He's got an incredible step, and you know, if you look at the impact someone like Damian McKenzie has made for the All Blacks, I see Willems making a very similar impact for the Springboks. I think he would be lethal coming off the bench, and he's got the ability to play 15, 10 and even 12. And he's only 20. I think people tend to forget that it's good that he's in the mix now. By the time he gets to the World Cup, he'll have played probably 10 tests, 12 tests, and have like 2 seasons of international experience. I rate him very highly though.
Do you?
Yeah, I rate him highly. I think Pollard is a good player. You know, Yankees will be there and thereabouts. You know, I'm pleased that he played well when he came on in the second half against the All Blacks. But I don't think he's ever going to be that fixture and that permanent fixture. I think the future would be between a Pollard, a Willems, and I think there's still an interesting Pat Lambie for next year. Once he's Pat Lambie, yeah, to play 10 or 15, just to have that experience. I know he's looking for 3 players per position, knowing that one of those 3 will probably fall out because of injury.
Well, you could pretty much bet your house that Lambie will be one of those players.
Well, unless he just gets back that month before, yeah. And it was so unfortunate. He had played so well for us in last year. You know, Dan Carter's last season there, he was starting. Carter was coming off the bench in the last 20 minutes to finish a game, and Lambie would then go back to fullback. So I think the big thing though is there's been a lot of trust put in local-based players. When I spoke to him last week, Rassie said he knows who he's got internationally playing overseas. That's if a Bismarck du Plessis or a Ruan Pino or a Frans Steyn, if he has to bring them in, he will, because he knows they've performed at that level before. The key was to find players here who could perform at that level, and he already feels that England series, the Mendoza, Suncorp defeat, Wellington, has given him a fair idea of who's 1, 2 and 3 in that pecking order.
He's been rather unlucky with injuries, which has affected his transformation targets, I think.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, you know, there were some people questioning his commitment to transformation when he put out a match 23 that had eight black players in it. For the All Black test, 8 or 9, you know, a couple of years ago, we were in euphoric with that. So, and then he had 5 players, black players who were injured, who were definite starters in the side. So I don't question his commitment to transformation. He knows what targets and goals he's got. He said that he will achieve them, you know, and I think he's also picking players because he believes they are the best in their positions. And if you take, he rates Lukhanyo massively, okay? He says he's one of the most understated players. He gets through so much work. He says what the public don't see and what the media don't see, the coaches definitely see. But he's broken his arm, so he's out for these 2 tests. He will be available for the end of the year tour. Damien Delandi is out, injured, so he's going to go with an Andre Esterhuizen at 12, give him another go, with a Jesse Kriel outside of him and then a Pollard at 10. The big problem they have is scrum off. So they've got a Faf de Klerk, but they don't quite know who they've got second, third. There's experienced scrum offs overseas. I know he rates Ambrose Papier very highly, but he's been in the squad this whole season and he hasn't played him much, so it could be a thing that he doesn't feel he's ready, that he needs a little bit more time. And then Urban van Zyl is, you know, Farida Preur rates him as the best scrum off in South Africa and could become one of the best in the world. So it's again, he hasn't come through as quickly as we thought he would. But when a guy like Farida Preur gives him his endorsement, I'm gonna back that more than kind of what I think of the player. And so yeah, I think they'll put out a decent enough side that should beat Australia and beat them with a little bit to spare.
That, you know, the spread is 8.5, and if you look at the last 20 games played between Australia and South Africa, in South Africa, I think South Africa has an 86% winning percentage. 3 losses, 1 draw, 16 wins.
It's a strange dynamic between these 2 teams. It's like the Boks don't believe they can win in Australia, and Australia doesn't believe they can win in South Africa. It's been rare that we've won over there, and it's been very rare, as you just pointed out, that they've won here. Under Robbie Deans, they kind of broke that hoodoo. They won in Durban and they won in Bloemfontein in that incredible test match where they were 39-6 up Australia. The Boks came back and then lost it in the last minute through Kurtley Beale. I don't think he's ever kicked a penalty in Test rugby, but he banned one over from 45 metres in Bloemfontein. When you look at last year's matches, they drew in Australia and they drew in Bloemfontein. It could have been a draw a couple of weeks ago in Brisbane. There was one score in it. The two sides are very evenly matched, but I think the psychology of the Springboks will have gone up after that incredible effort against the All Blacks in Wellington. There's a lot of confidence in that side and rightful expectation now that they should put Australia away and should set up then a wonderful closing match to the Rugby Championship against the All Blacks in Pretoria.
I'm of the opinion as well that they'll win this game with something to spare.
You know, it was important they got that win in New Zealand. If they had lost that, be it by 20 points or by 1 point, there would have been a lot of doubt about the Springbok squad. The England series will have been forgotten.
Well, I think with the rugby yahoos in this country, and I mean that affectionately, of course, there's always going to be scrutiny. It doesn't matter what the Springboks do, you know.
But if you look at the context of going to a World Cup, and to win the World Cup, you've got to beat 3 of the top 5 teams in the world, and your players have got to have that confidence that they've already beaten them. That's why it was essential they got to win against the All Blacks. So they go and they play them in a pool game. So win or lose that one, they can meet them again in the final because they go into different sections. But that belief that you've beaten a team once means you can do it again. That's there. They've beaten England. They know they can beat Argentina. They've done that before. They've beaten Ireland before. They have to beat Australia, this current side, to know that if they do meet Australia in a playoff game, they can beat them as well. And that's, I think, going to be the focus. In speaking to Rassie about the year and what his targets were, it was to beat those kind of sides at least once, going into next year's World Cup year, for the psychology around it. And that's why they have to. So I don't even think it's negotiable. They have to win at home against an Australian side that doesn't travel well. And has never really travelled well to these parts. I remember when Eddie Jones used to bring some amazingly strong, and Rod McQueen, when they were world champions, to South Africa, and we had some indifferent Springbok teams selections, and we'd still beat them. And chatting to Eddie, I'd say to him, why? And he said, I don't know, mate. I don't know what they put in their water. They try to wear the sunglasses. They try to not sleep. They try to sleep. They had all these kind of things about coming here, but their players battle with the hostility of the South African crowds, where New Zealanders tend to kind of embrace it, and it fires them up a bit more. Yeah, I think the 8.5, I think it's going to be more than that. I think it could be anything 12 to 15 points to the Springboks. And I think that pack will be a lot stronger. That Maul was starting to work against New Zealand. They didn't use that often against Australia. So I think there was a lot that they were building to that All Black game, to try and go there and shock New Zealand with the intensity of how they played, because they hadn't defended like that throughout the year. Their line speed, the rush defense, and then also just the work rate of the players off the ball. They'll see a lot more of the pull this weekend.
It's a draining field to play on.
Yeah, the Nelson Mandela Bay field. It's I mean, we were there a couple of years ago and we walked on it, and because of all the sand that's underneath it. And I know that when the Kings were playing there, one of the big advantages they had when they did play at home was that team's legs went in the last 20-25 minutes. It was like they were playing on the beach, and so it looks beautiful and pristine on the eye. But when you walk on it, it's
very sandy soil, isn't it?
And it's like the Suncorp Stadium as one of the fastest surfaces that matches played at speed. Guys seem to look quicker, be faster there. With this one, you'll see it. Players may at times appear sluggish, like they're not getting away. It's because they are in quicksand half the time.
It's an interesting field. I suppose they've done it for the drainage, but I mean, it's not an easy field to play on.
Are you surprised by the spread, 8.5 points?
No, I think the bookies, they're in business for a reason. I think 8.5 is what it should be, but I think it'll be more. I think the Springboks will win by 15 to 20. I think that they'll run away with the game. If that same team shows up that showed up against New Zealand, they won't have to defend nearly as well to beat Australia. That's for sure.
I also think if you look at the squad selections, and an interesting one is that he sent Wilco Low back to the Currie Cup.
Yeah, where he belongs.
Yeah, and his thing was, the guy's work rate needs to improve. It's one of the biggest props in world rugby. He needs to show that mongrel, and I think there was a lot of hoo-ha made about Wilco when he played last year, and he had that strong game against the All Blacks in Cape Town, and typical of rugby supporters in this country. whoever came before him was forgotten and the new guy had arrived, and I think he may have believed that press a bit. He played a lot during Super Rugby, but his conditioning wasn't always great. And Vincent Koch has been the form prop in the UK for Saracens. He was only not selected he was originally selected for the England series, but he decided to have the bicep operation then, so he could be ready for Saracen season, but then also for the end of the year tour with the Boks. And he came back from injury, played last week, and was included. He'll play off the bench, but he's a huge addition to the tight five mix, and he's building a very, very good pack. When you see who's actually not in that pack at the moment as well, I think he's starting to find his lock combination, which is Irvin and Franco Mostert, and Pieter-Steph du Toit is growing into that role as a flanker who can also play at lock, so he becomes the ideal match 23 player, but capable of starting at lock or at blindside flank as being a starting option there. So, you know, there's a little bit about Pieter-Steph at the moment that you can start thinking, could he start playing a role that Jacques Callis played in the one-day side for the South African cricketers, because he adds so much value. And again, I think he's a player that Russie's worked hard on to improve his mentality, his toughness. He's always been a naturally talented footballer, and every coach has rated him. But I think by not picking him originally, by giving him the captaincy against Wales, but letting him know he was in the second tier of those players, the guy's just improved every time he's got an opportunity, and he's kind of forced his way into the starting lineup.
Yeah, I think that's the one thing that excites me about the Springboks, is that the people are playing for their positions. I think they've developed some depth, whereas last year and the year before they just didn't have it.
I think also when you can develop depth is when the coach is very clear about his pecking order. And most successful teams, the All Blacks, the Bok teams of 2007, 2009, the Nick Mallett side in 98, you knew who was 1, 2 and 3 in that side, regardless of how they played. So with Rassie, he's also very clear about who his 1, 2 and 3 positions are. It's getting the quality of who's at 3 at the moment, and is there someone in the domestic scene or internationally that is kind of on par. Pollard is definitely the first choice 10 at the moment. The first choice 13. Dialandi probably has the inside edge at 12 where they can't get Franstein. Dianti definitely. And Kosi, I think he'll come back into the starting mix or on the bench. Cheslin Colby, I think his role will be more a Damien McKenzie off the bench. Galant's been he would have loved to have had Warwick Galant playing. He's been injured, but it's opening up opportunities for Damian Willemse. 9, as we spoke earlier, they have problems there in terms of the backup if Faf goes down, and Ruan Pienaar's made himself unavailable. Dwayne will be a big addition when he comes back. I thought Warren Whiteley played very well against New Zealand, but I think it's because Pieter-Steph played that kind of Dwayne role. Siya Kolisi gets through a lot of work. He got through a lot of work in Wellington. The locks, again, I think we've got a lot of depth there, and we've got a lot of depth at prop, and I think there's been a lot of work done with Skulk Brits being in the squad, even though he hasn't played, working with Bonge, also helping Malcolm Marx. So when you start looking at that squad like that, for the first time you're starting to see a Springbok squad where you know who they are, and that's one of the keys to the All Blacks, is you know that match 23, you know kind of what their strongest side is and has been for the last 5 years. You know when they are blooding 10 players because they're looking at depth. The last 2 years with the Springboks, you just never knew who was going to be picked every weekend, and you didn't quite know what the combinations would be. Or you saw a weak player getting picked consistently and you thought, why is that person there? I do see the signs to what he's built, and I think the only thing that really shocked everyone was the Mendoza defeat and the way they lost to Mendoza. Because the way they won that England series, even the way they played at times against Australia and then New Zealand, you could see what they were building from that first kind of test match when they were 24-3 down after 10 minutes. And I think people need to see Mendoza as a bit of an aberration and judge this team in the context of they've beaten England twice, they've beaten the All Blacks, and they should beat Australia on Saturday. And that makes for a very successful start.
I would agree with that. We're in agreement of the -8.5. We're gonna lay the points with the Boks, -8.5, and betting that they're gonna beat the Australia by 9 or more. Again, if you either laying points or taking points. We're laying 8.5 for South Africa, so -8.5 points on South Africa, which means they've got to win by 9 or more. It's only been a few times that these games have been over 60 points. What do you think the score is going to be, Mark?
I think 35-20.
Yeah, I think it'll be a low-scoring game. I think something around 25 25, 13, something like that. You know, so again, it's always been around the 45, 46 point mark.
And a 9-point differential, which ties in with what we're saying, is to go the 9+.
I wonder how long Michael Checker can keep his job.
Well, they've said till the World Cup, he's not going anywhere to the World Cup, and they kind of feel that they've lumped with him. And again there, you know, when your success rate is in the 40%, it kind of becomes the standard that gets set out there. The All Blacks are the exception in terms of that incredible 90% win record. But most teams, if you can average 55 or 60%, you've done quite well, given how close the 2 till 70s in the world. The Boks should be aiming for a 70% win record under Rassie. Historically, our win record has only ever been in the 60s, either between 60, I think it was 63% pre-isolation that the Boks won and 61% post-isolation. So there's a good 38 for 39% of the time that South Africa does lose. It won't be on Saturday, as we keep on saying. But yeah, I think there just needs to be a bit more patience in terms of there is a bigger picture. We keep on saying it is the World Cup, but it is important that they get certain wins along the way. And that gives people the belief that this team can actually go to the World Cup as contenders, not just pretenders. And I said it at the time of the World Cup draw, we have the best World Cup draw because the defending champions are in our pool, and win or lose, we don't go home. And we avoid them again till a potential final. And that Wellington game could easily have been a World Cup final. And we saw them make very, very basic mistakes when they were pressured for the first time. So I think everything's on track at the moment. It's important we get that win. I also think people need to understand transformation, whether there's 14 in the 23 or 8 in the 23, there is a commitment to it. There's also, for the first time, we're getting black player depth being built in the squad, and they're getting game time as well. It's not the guys are getting picked and playing 2 or 3 minutes, and there's an openness about it. So you're always going to get the odd person that counts the numbers every weekend, and you know, I think Rassie is also aware he's never going to get away from that, but he also wants to kill off the stigma that players are there just because of targets.
Well, I think that to me is always going to be the legacy of transformation, is that it doesn't matter what, you know, it doesn't matter what the player does. If he's there based on the color of his skin, if he's black, it's just going to be assumed that he's there because he's black and filling a quota. You know, I think that. Yeah,
no one looks at the 50% white quota, I always say. You know, no one in this country, unfortunately, ever says, geez, is that white player good enough to be there because there's a 50% white quota? But the key was, if you got 10 brilliant black players and 8 get injured, that's what he was looking at to ensure that he's developing, say, 20 players at the same time that, given the opportunity, are good enough. And everything is about environment and creating time on the field. And in the past, any black player who's played for South Africa, it's like he's got to do it in his first game and he's got to do it for 80 mintes. And if he doesn't do it in his first game, he's gone. And if he does it for 10 games and has one bad game, he should never have been there. And
well, I was wondering if there's any law or rule that's been imposed on white players scoring tries anymore, because I haven't seen a white player score a try for 3 or 4 games now.
The quality of player that's come through, and especially the quality of black player over the last season, has also just been a reward for good selection. If you take Deontay, the winner, you know, when Rassie first up said that guy's going to be special, he didn't say he needs another 2 years, we need to develop him. He picked him straight away. You know, he's very clear on there's X-factor players, but then there's also players, he said, that a coach picks first. And at the moment he says, look, Kanye Army is one of those players that you build. He's starting to build a team around him. He won't be playing in the next 2 weeks, as we said, because of the broken arm, but that's the clarity of thought that we're getting from a coach for the first time in a long time, where before you always felt the coach didn't actually know who his 13 was or his 15 was or what he wanted to do with his 10. So I think we're in a good place, but we need the momentum to continue after the Wellington test with a comfortable and a quality win against an Australian side who pushed Ireland very close and are still ranked higher than us in the world rankings. It will be a good win if we knock over Australia, and we have to knock them over.
And just jumping into that transformation issue, it's incredibly an emotive topic, and people tend to lose the plot when we discuss this. My view on transformation is simply this: if you look at North America and you look at basketball, you look at American football, baseball, those sort of sports where black people were banned from playing. Now they dominate them. I'm not saying that that's going to be the case here, but when you open up opportunities for people that didn't have opportunities, and they represent a huge portion of the population, that you're bound to improve the overall quality of sports across all sporting codes.
I think you're spot on here, and then also for the public to identify with a team that is transformed, and those players are the superstars. There's all of a sudden there's strength in certain key positions. You look at Bongi when he started, how brilliant he was against England. When he comes off the bench, I mean, Marx is an exceptional player, but Bongi is a very good hooker as well. And so it's just an identification for the public from whatever communities to say our players are in there and they're of the best in that team and potentially in the world. And that's what has been lacking in the past. And I think that's where this team is on the cusp of kind of turning transformation into a way of life when it comes to rugby and not an occasion.
Yeah, and I think Rassie's getting it. You know, funny enough, Jake White got it reasonably well compared when you think it was 10 years back. And we're going to have that, you know, that thing that Henneke did, what was it, before the World Cup, where he was going to unleash a secret weapon. Rudy Page.
For Rudy Page, and he gave him, I think, 3 minutes in a playoff.
And some people would say 3 minutes too long.
Yeah, and it was just, again, you know, it did the whole transformation a disservice in his 4th year as a coach to make that last-minute call to stack up numbers. You know, he had taken him on tour a year before. They didn't play him on tour either. And I think the biggest difference, and first coach who's done this, he's identified players, especially black players, and he's identified game time and how much game time they've needed. And he's done that when I spoke to him pre the first selection. He had done all the game times of every black player in this country in Super Rugby, and it was appalling at how little game time so many of them got. Even though they were in the match 23 every Saturday, they were perceived to be playing. But he'd say, how can a player make an impact? How can a player make a case for selection if he's not getting game time? And I think he's been true to that in his selections, in the England series, in that Welsh Test match, and then in the 3 Test matches so from the Rugby Championship. What he's also been very clear about is when a guy hasn't cut the mustard, he sent him straight back to domestic rugby with certain targets that they have to achieve, and that's been white and black players. So if you take when Oxenchair was sent back, his conditioning wasn't good enough, he's too flamboyant, he needed to work harder. Will Colo's been sent back, same kind of thing. If you look at certain of the backline players that have been sent back, they've gone back, they've been kept in the mould and in the extended squad, but there's been a lot of communication with the domestic coaches, with the regional coaches about what this player has to do if he's going to be a part of that squad of 38 that they're building towards the World Cup.
Let's look at let's go away from transformation. Let's look at the All Blacks. 17.5, they're favourite to beat Argentina this weekend. What are your thoughts on that?
If it all goes for Argentina and New Zealand aren't quite on their game, it could be very, very close. So it's one of those games that has a lot of intrigue for me. I actually want to watch that game, as opposed to, you know, All Blacks playing a side ranked 10th or 11th in the world. They'll knock them over by 40. I don't think at all. I think there's a lot in this game, and there's also a lot the confidence that they took from the way they played, especially for that first hour against New Zealand in New Zealand. Stay away from those 18 points.
Well, I'm going to be telling people to climb in there.
Okay.
I'm going to be putting 2,000 rand down on each game. I'm going to be taking the points at +8 to +17.5 for Argentina, and laying the points at -8.5 for the Boks. Both 2,000 rand bets, pays back 3,800 each bet. Should be an interesting week of rugby. Thanks, Mark, for coming in, and we'll see you next week.